Hey you guys, what's up? I'm Ashley from heavenathome.org, and this is the Heaven at Home podcast, where my goal is to encourage you in your personal growth journey while being open, honest, and owning my story. We have faith-based conversations and tackle a bunch of different tough topics. Check out the description to follow me and learn more. Remember, you are fully known and deeply loved. Let's do this. Have you guys ever thought about how marriage is one of the very few, if not the only, context for relationships where we place the demand to always 24/7 feel like we love the other person? Like, is that just me? Am I the only one who's noticed that? I've thought about relationships that I have with really close friends, with really cool cousins, and my mom and my siblings and my daughter. And I love these people. I genuinely love them. I love them beyond words. But with every passing day, I wouldn't say that I always feel like I love them. Or I wouldn't say that I'm always conscious of the feeling that I love them. And even more than that, I don't feel the pressure to always feel up to that task. Like, I don't always, see a problem if I don't have the energy to give 110% toward a relationship. And although I understand that the relationship between spouses requires a certain level of intentionality and feeling and all that, I think more often than not, what's more important is the choice that we make to love the other person. And the more that I think about it, the more I'm thinking it's unrealistic to think that you always have to feel in love. Maybe that's just me. So anyway, today we're going to talk about what to do when you don't want to be married anymore. And maybe you've had the thought, oh, I don't love this person. I don't love my spouse. I don't want to be married anymore. I want a divorce. Before we even get into the topic, I'm just going to say that the thoughts that you entertain are going to be the thoughts that you believe. And the more often you think the thought and allow the thought, the more often you're going to create a neural pathway where that's just going to be your default way of thinking. I remember sharing, maybe within the last couple months, a story in my Instagram and Facebook account. And I said that one of the biggest mistakes I feel like Christians make going into marriage is overestimating yourself or overestimating your partner and thinking that you or the other person or the relationship is invincible. I remember I was not planning on sharing this story. But because the caveat that I was going to make about Christians is that more often than not, they think that if they have Jesus, that's going to be enough to make up for all the problems. It's going to make up for all the potential conflicts and stuff like that. And although I think that loving Jesus is a really big part of marriage, like 100%, there's still things that we have to do. There's still things that we have to address. There's still things that we have to heal from. And I'm just going to share this personal story really quick because it kind of reminded me, just in mentioning this one little point. And y'all just be prepared because this is going to be a long one. Like, I already know it's going to be long. But I remember being in a dating relationship. And me and my partner were talking. We were in the car. We were at a stoplight. And I came across some information. And the information that I came across said that this person might struggle with commitment issues, that, they're always on the hunt for something new and exciting. Sometimes they have issues following through because they're so focused on dreaming, they kind of lose track of small details, like stuff like that. But the commitment part really, really stuck out to me. And I remember being at an intersection in Florida, and I had the thought, okay, this is a red flag. This is a red flag for sure. But if we have Jesus, if we have the Holy Spirit, I know we're going to be okay. And looking back, I define that as a very pivotal moment, because I used my faith as a reason to overlook instead of address and move forward. I feel like even with Jesus, even with the Holy Spirit, even with my devotion to my faith and the other person's devotion to their faith, it's still a thing that has to be addressed. It's still a thing that has to be worked through, talked through. And I look back on that moment kind of often, because I'm like, how often do we make the mistake of thinking that Jesus can just do all the work for us when it comes to marriage, when it comes to relationships? And I think when you realize how vulnerable, precious, delicate, valuable marriage is, as a person, as a spouse, you will be much more vigilant about the quality of your heart and the thoughts that you entertain. And you'll do a lot more work to care for your partner's heart and your partner's mind. And you'll do anything and everything to protect and preserve what you have. And in case you're in that very faith-filled boat where you think that you are the exception because you're okay and your partner is okay and you guys both have Jesus, I promise you, you are not the exception. You are the rule. And there is an enemy that is all too ready to sneak in and steal from you and your spouse and your children and your home and your ministry. And if he can't take away those tangible things, he'll take away the joy. He'll take away the love. He'll take away the vision, the dream, fill in the blank. There's always something. And as I'm going through each and every single one of these points, I want you to know that this is not coming from a place of entitlement or superiority or anything like that. A lot of this is going to sound like tough love, but it's coming from a very tender-hearted place. Why do I say that? I say that because I've been there. And if you've, been with me for a while, you know my story, you know my situation, you know my end of things for the most part. But I've also been here. I've also been the person that wasn't in love. I've also been the person that didn't want to be married. I was also the person that wanted a divorce. And this list of things that I'm going to share with you is stuff that I did my best to put into practice. But at the very end of the day, when I wasn't enough, when my daughter wasn't enough of a reason for me to stay, quite frankly, it was just Jesus. It was just me trying to obey God. And one of the things that I want to say, because I feel like, and this might be a completely separate episode, so I'm going to try not to dive too deeply into this thought, but I do think there are times where God specifically calls you to stay. And that was the case with me. if any other man or woman was in a situation that emulated mine in any way, my advice would be very different from the steps that I took. And it's simply because annually God told me to stay and gave me the same command to stay. And that was not easy, but that's what I did. And, to go more into the details of navigating that whole thing, that would be a completely different episode. If you want to hear about that, let me know. Because that is a very different message than the one I'm about to share right now. So anyway, last caveat I want to make, which I do want to make sure to mention because I feel like it's really important. As a person, I have deal breakers. There are certain situations and certain circumstances where I feel like it is best to leave, best to exit, best to get a divorce. And these are for very serious situations. One of them is biblical and therefore should be obvious. It's if there has been like any form of adultery, infidelity, like cheating, that is a valid reason for you to leave. You don't have to justify your reason for leaving any further than that. That's just not okay. Another one, which this one is to me more personal, I do not condone or endorse any type of abuse, verbal, physical, mental, that's not okay. Calling someone out of their name, throwing things, shouting, and that kind of atmosphere being something that's regular and common, absolutely no. That is just a no-go. And then the third one that I can think of is any type of relationship where there's like a threat of danger to you or your children. That is something that's really, really serious. It should be taken seriously. So if your life has been threatened in any way, it's time to go. I think you matter. Your children matter. Your safety matters. Your mental, emotional, physical health matters. And in my opinion, all these things that I just said as complete deal breakers sacrifice all those things. So yeah, that I thought was really important to mention, just because I didn't want there to be a misconception that, when you don't want to be married because of reasons like that, here are the things that you should do to stay. That's not what I'm saying at all. Everything that I'm saying now is in the context of a relatively healthy, secure, mutually capable relationship. I don't know if that makes sense, but okay, so we're going to get into the topic of what to do when you don't want to be married anymore. And these first two tips that I'm going to be sharing with you have to do with your thought life and the thoughts that you entertain. And I kind of realized this after having a conversation a bit ago with a college friend about, just what you should do if you find that you don't want to be married anymore. So this first one is to stop your stinking thinking. And I like it because it rhymes. But it's basically stop your negative way of thinking. The first example of this is catastrophizing. I don't know. I'm going to sound uneducated. But it's basically when you envision the worst outcome. So basically, a thought that's similar to, if I do this, then the worst thing is going to happen. Or I'm just going to plan and anticipate for the worst case scenario. Another example of negative thinking is if you tend to be a black and white thinker, living on one extreme or the other. A common example of this one might be like, okay, if I'm not happy now, I won't be happy later. That's an example of that. Another example of negative thinking is making overgeneralizations. So an example of this could be, this person isn't loving me the way that I need them to. so they obviously don't love me at all. That's an overgeneralization. In my mind, it's very similar to jumping to conclusions, and that is one of my pet peeves. It irks my nerves. It is very illogical. It lacks critical thinking, and it bothers me. So yeah, that one was a little bit personal. All right, next one is mental filtering. And this is when you have a habit in your thinking where you're presented with a lot of information, but you filter to the negative circumstances. So you could say all these things in my marriage are going really well. This is good. This is good. This is good. I love all these things about my spouse, but I'm going to focus on the one thing that's going wrong. I'm going to focus on the thing I don't like. And that negative thing is going to outweigh all the good that's happening. That's mental filtering. Another example of negative thinking, which might be common for women, is personalization, taking things personally. So, for example, if someone seems upset or is a little bit more quiet or more distant, if you're taking something personally, you're likely to think that it's because of something you did or something you said, or, it has something to do with you, even when it doesn't. An extension of that, or something really similar to that, is mind reading. And it's when you're interpreting something your spouse does or something your spouse says, and you're reading it as you're making a conclusion based off that. So basically saying that, okay, this person is doing this to me because they're upset that I did this yesterday, or they're trying to punish me for this mistake I made a while ago, or something like that. And instead of asking questions, and instead of having a conversation, instead of voicing your concern, you just jump the gun and you answer the question for yourself, whether it's true or not. That's an example of mind reading. Another example of negative thinking, which I'm sure is super, super common, is any type of should statements. So saying like, I should be like this. My spouse should be like that. We should be like them. Statements like that add unnecessary and sometimes unrealistic pressure. And that's something that's very, very common. Another one is labeling. So it's kind of like, how do I explain this one? It's saying that like one instance defines who you are. Like one mistake defines who you are, or saying that, okay, like for example, like, man, I'm not feeling in love right now, so I'm not in love at all. Or, our relationship hasn't been happy for the last couple days, so I'm unhappily married. Like, it's placing a label, a very fixed, narrow, rigid label. Another example of negative thinking is emotional reasoning. This is one that is very common for a lot of people. And it's any situation where you agree with your feelings and say, okay, I feel like this, so it is like this. I don't feel in love, so I don't love them. That's a common one. Or, I feel like there's no hope for us, so that's it. There's just no hope for us because I don't feel like there's hope. Like anything like that where you're saying like, I feel like this, so this is what it is. Which is, okay, this is like another one kind of similar to that, but fortune telling. So this is where, without taking any steps toward a future that you want or anything like that, because you think that you perceive the end, you don't even try. You don't even make an effort. That's fortune telling. So you're saying, okay, this is going to end and it's going to end like this. So, there's no point. That way of thinking removes the responsibility of your role. And you actually do play a huge role in how things move forward. So those are examples of stinking thinking. Along, a similar focus of realizing the thoughts that we have and the thoughts that we entertain. One of them is ruminating. So my tip is to stop ruminating. And ruminating is when you think of something repeatedly and obsessively. You think about it deeply, you think about it for a long time, and it's a thought process that is very unproductive. And it usually adds a layer of stress to it because you're continuously thinking the same thoughts about the same issues and the same problems with the same person without reaching any type of resolution or without taking any action. And one of the things that I've learned in, trying to address my own mental health issues is learning to notice when my thoughts are unproductive, when my thoughts are not serving me well, when they're actually keeping me stuck or keeping me sad or keeping me depressed. I think very often people ruminate on their regrets. They ruminate on, unrealistic or unnecessary, unmet expectations. Ruminating does nothing. It just gives you the impression that you are doing something by thinking about it. And a lot of people find themselves stuck there. When we're ruminating on negative or unproductive thoughts, sometimes it's just because you don't want to admit the truth. And sometimes admitting the truth, whether it's negative or positive, can be a huge step toward making a positive difference. For example, if you're wrestling with feelings of not wanting to be married anymore, but you don't want to admit that you do in fact want a divorce, so you stay stuck in a perpetuating cycle of, I don't want to be married, this is why, I don't like this about my spouse, but I want a divorce, but I don't want a divorce, and all this stuff. Like, all that stuff sounds very negative. It sounds bad. But if you just take a second and admit where you are now empowered to do something about it. Okay, I don't want to be married. Okay, I don't actually like my spouse. If this is the case, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do to fix it? What do I have to change? And, so we're going to get into that a little bit more with the following points. But I just wanted to say that, sometimes it's actually really empowering to admit the things you just don't want to admit. So some tips to help you stop ruminating is there's this technique called thought stopping. And it's when you consciously stop a negative thought when it occurs. If you're noticing that you have, like any type of negative thought toward yourself or your spouse or your marriage or something, just putting that on pause and just stopping the thought where it is and not entertaining it further. One could be like, for example, like lies that you could believe about your relationship. So saying that, I'll give an example of one that I used to believe often and one I still struggle with sometimes, is that like, I'm inconsequential. I don't matter. My feelings don't matter. That was a very common sentiment toward the end of my marriage, and it's one that I still struggle with sometimes to this day. That is a very frequent thought, and I could choose to ruminate on that and dwell on that for the next 30 minutes of my life, or I could stop the thought when it comes. I could just end it right there. Another lie that I used to entertain, or another negative thought I used to have was, okay, this person wants to leave, I'm going to give them a reason to. Kind of like the thing our parents would say, or like, you're going to cry, I'm going to give you a reason to cry. Very toxic way of thinking. choosing to put a stop to that thought when you notice, when you're conscious about the fact that you're thinking it. Even something as simple as like, man, things would be better if we just got a divorce. Things would be better for me. My situation would be better. My finances would be better. My life would be better if I got a divorce. Stop that thought the second that you have it. Let's see. Another thought. Let's see. I'm trying to come up with like relatable examples, in case it like brings up something in your mind if it applies. One that I used to have was, okay, like you've gone this far and you've done good up to this point. You've done all you can. Now it's time that you serve yourself. Or, like your good performance in the past gives you permission to do whatever you want now, or something like that. That was a unhealthy thought that I had to keep in check, and I had to stop that. So that's what thought stopping is. It's very simple. It's very cutthroat. There's not much more to it than that. There's this other technique to stop ruminating, which is, I think it's cognitive restructuring. And it's when you challenge the negative thought that you have. So for example, that thought that I shared before, okay, my feelings don't matter, I'm inconsequential. Combating that thought with a positive affirmation instead. So saying that my feelings do matter, I am important, I am of consequence, stuff like that. Or let's see, instead of the thought like, okay, things would be better if we get a divorce, saying, no, like things will be better if I work to make them better. Or, like instead of saying, man, I'm not happy here, I'm not going to be happy ever, saying like, no, I can work to be happy here. My happiness is my responsibility. Like combating and challenging the negative thought that you ruminate on. Another technique is probably a bit more like outwardly practical. And like sometimes when you're still and it's quiet, you have a lot of time to think. It's very easy to get stuck there, especially when there's like heavy emotions attached to it. Sometimes it helps to just get busy, to do something, exercise, listen to good, fulfilling music, taking up a hobby or something like that, going for a walk, or choosing to pray instead, like engaging in activity to consciously distract you and create, a new way of behaving when you're in that space. Another one, which is a really big one for me, I think I end up doing this innately, but a way to stop ruminating sometimes is to focus on having a problem-solving approach and action-oriented type thinking. So shifting from just dwelling on the problem to coming up with a solution, coming up with something that you can do today, tomorrow, this week, this month, something like that. Focusing on something that you can actually do to fix it. And another big one, which I kind of alluded to in sharing this, conversation about ruminating, is to have compassion on yourself. Like, accept yourself, accept where you are, accept the truth and the reality so that you can move forward. So many people stay stuck in denial, and that's not necessary. You can just accept where you are. And, one of the things that I always had to categorize, especially when I'm struggling with decisions, is that wrestle between what I want now and what I want most. That was like a theme that came up in my prayer life a lot too. Like, for example, I'd be like, man, God, I don't want to be married. I don't want to be married to this person. I don't want to stay stuck in this condition. But what I want more than that is your will. What I want more than that is to obey. What I want more than that is a happy, healthy, whole family, you know? And with, when it comes to like denial and accepting where you are, a lot of times people think that the thing that they're reluctant to admit is going to be the thing that determines their future, and it's not. You get to determine that. And it can actually just be really empowering if you approach it in the right way. And sometimes, we need help doing that. So moving on, I have a whole blog about this one point, so I'll probably have to attach it in the description. But my third tip is to stop being a toxic person. A lot of times, genuinely good, well-meaning people have toxic habits, toxic ways of communicating, toxic ways of dealing with conflict. And sometimes we need people on the outside to tell us the things that we're doing wrong. Sometimes our spouse can be a really informative person to give feedback about how we're handling things. And sometimes we can just figure that out for ourselves. So it's really important to reflect on your behavior, on your thinking, on your thought posture, on your triggers. Address the underlying issues and patterns, and heal. Heal and handle your relationship well. The blog that I wrote is probably really easy to find on heavenathome.org. It's called How to Stop Being a Toxic Person and Thrive in Your Relationships. And in that blog post, it mentions signs that you're dealing with a toxic person, signs that you are a toxic person, how to stop being a toxic person. And it even goes into some of the ways that being unhealed or being broken can influence, your character when it comes to relationships. So that's something I really recommend. And that's a whole other thing. So if you want more on that, just look that one up. The fourth tip is to set healthy boundaries that'll benefit you and your spouse, because you guys have a covenant relationship. So your boundaries ideally should protect and preserve you both. Examples of boundaries could be like how to handle conversations when you guys are discussing feelings and, respecting each other's feelings without judgment or argument or invalidation. Another example of a healthy boundary could be around like communication and language. So making a rule not to say certain things, not to have, really challenging conversations at certain times of the day, listening without interrupting, stuff like that. Those are kind of examples of communication boundaries. Another one is time boundaries. Choosing to have quality time, prioritizing that regularly, also setting time apart for yourself and, giving your spouse their own time to do their own thing with their own interests. Another one is physical boundaries, so respecting physical space, respecting consent when it comes to intimacy. There's financial boundaries, social boundaries, boundaries that you can have with family and friends, and how you handle those external influences, how you guys maintain the confidentiality of your marriage and your relationship, keeping certain issues to just yourselves or with a trusted third party, a therapist, a mentor, a pastor. There could be boundaries when it comes to conflict resolution and decision making. This is a really big one. Like for social boundaries, like if someone is more introverted than the other, like having respect for the other person's social preferences, mutually, like challenging yourself to talk to more people, hang out with more friends. And on the flip side, considering your partner when they've been at a social event for a couple hours already and they've had a really long week and they're really exhausted. Like, having a mutual respect for that is a big thing that I think isn't often talked about. And like financial boundaries, I think finances comes up a lot in marriages. Having financial independence, allowing a person to spend a certain amount of money without the need for approval, but also discussing and agreeing on budgeting and financial goals. I think, setting those boundaries, communicating them, sifting through them ahead of time keeps the emotional damage of overstepping from happening. Because when a boundary is crossed, I feel like it gets very painful, awkward, offensive. And when they're just explicitly communicated, it kind of just relieves that. I feel like it keeps that from happening a bit. Another tip that I have, let's just kind of reflect. So the first one I mentioned was to stop your stinking thinking, stop ruminating, stop being a toxic person, set healthy boundaries. Okay, so this next one is to recognize your needs. Recognize your needs and understand that sometimes you have to specifically ask for what you need. You need to communicate what you need. You can't always expect another person to know. So some examples of needs that you might have might be for conversation. And this is for men and women. I think people would probably be surprised about that. But, sometimes both require a certain level of communication. Some people really desire conversations that are in depth, that are spiritual, intellectual. They get very exhausted with small talk. And so sometimes they need conversation that's really engaging. Another need when it comes to communication would be, like similar to the boundary that we discussed earlier regarding emotions, but some people need to feel safe to express their thoughts and their feelings. Those are really big ones. Another one could be like mutual respect, valuing each other's opinions, and differences of opinions. Having, you could have a need for trust to be demonstrated in a certain way. People have a need for emotional support at times, like if someone is dealing with something that's really challenging. Because marriage requires a certain level of emotional intimacy, there should be a certain amount of emotional support that is given also. I think when it comes to needs, I'm really, really considering men and husbands in this situation, because I feel like often their needs get overlooked. Both partners need to provide and receive emotional support, being there for each other in times of need. Like women, wives, you need to know that your men have feelings, whether they want to admit it or not. They have feelings. They can be very sensitive as well. So have regard for that the same way that you would want them to have regard for you. And men, husbands, don't assume that a woman needing emotional support is her being emotionally needy. Like sometimes it's just as simple as, she just needs to know you care. She just needs to know that you're emotionally available. She just needs you to be empathetic. She needs you to be aware of her, to know her when it comes to her emotions. When it comes to the empathetic thing, I believe I have an episode on here and a blog post about that. which kind of gives like steps for how to be empathetic. But women, don't overlook the men when it comes to that. Another need can be for intimacy, a healthy level of physical and emotional intimacy that satisfies both partners, and having healthy conversations around that without any judgment in that space. I know like the more religious people are sometimes more judgmental when it comes to that stuff. So just having a nice, healthy, respectful boundary within that is really important. Talk about things openly, comfortably, respectfully. Commitment. People have a need for commitment. Both partners, men and women, both, they have to be committed to the relationship. They have to be willing to work through the challenges together. But both spouses also need to feel safe. They need to feel secure. Sometimes there's a need for equality, like to know that both partners have an equal say, an equal vote. They contribute equally. I think this one might be like a bigger one for guys, but having respect, that's something that's really important. Respect for time. My next tip is to I feel like this is a really, really big one, so I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. But we're talking about what to do when you don't want to be married anymore. That implies like a certain level of unhappiness and dissatisfaction. And so my next tip is to make sure that you're not expecting your spouse to be the one that makes you happy. I think that's a really big thing. I think that's a really common expectation that spouses have for each other. And ultimately, you are most responsible for your own happiness. I do think that there are, things in life that can contribute to our overall sense of unhappiness, like being stressed with finances. Like sometimes you just have to attack like smaller problems so that ultimately you're better off. So that could be like a thing to notice, is maybe just addressing, like smaller issues that are contributing to a larger whole, if that makes sense. But for the most part, I think that there are things that you can do to consciously work on your own happiness. I don't know if you've ever like done something that like afterward you were like, wow, like it was really easy to be happy in this space, or I was really happy after this one event. Like I just came back from a family vacation. I got to see so much more family than I've been able to see in like a really long time. I saw a lot more aunts and uncles and cousins, and it was really cool. And I was, thinking back on it, especially like this past week, and I was thinking about how like, man, when I'm surrounded by family, I am so happy. Like I'm happy without trying to be happy. And I can go on less sleep and be more productive. I can function throughout the day with less sleep. It's so weird how energizing and fulfilling it is to just be around family. And maybe you have like a similar feeling of that, like when you're around your family or when you're around your friends. Or if you can come up with like any other activity where you kind of have that sensation afterward where you're like, wow, that was really awesome. That made me really happy. Look for that. And some tips for that is, I guess, number one, to have like some self-awareness. Like you have to be aware of your emotions, like in order to do this correctly. Like you have to be aware, like, hey, I'm better off right now than I was a second ago. Or I'm finding it easier to be more fulfilled in this space than that space. Or, I'm sensing that doing this thing is actually really draining. I should be more conscious about how to fill up my cup after I finish doing this thing. You have to have self-awareness. You have to know yourself. You have to know your strengths and your weaknesses. You have to have like a certain level of emotional intelligence. You have to know the things that you are passionate about, like the things that excite you. Um, and ultimately, like, you have to see the way that your happiness, your state of being contributes to your relationship dynamic. One thing that I'm always going to say as often as I can is to always be looking to grow. And happiness is one of the areas where I think it's important to focus on. If you're an imperfect person, and I can 100% guarantee that you are an imperfect person, I think you should always be looking for areas to grow. And if you're not constantly like trying to improve in one way or another, then my immediate assumption is that you don't really see your stuff. Like, you don't see your weaknesses, you don't see your shortcomings, you don't see areas where you fall short. And I think that's really important. Like, how you are as an individual will influence how you are in a relationship. So do things that make you happy. Take up a hobby. And if you don't know what makes you happy, then just try experimenting with new things. One of the things I'm pretty sure I'm always going to say in one way or another is to pray. I feel like talking things out with Jesus is one of the things that has made me a happy person. I feel like I'm able to throw out the garbage and take in all the good things. Able to receive love, able to receive joy, able to receive vision, able to like entertain dreams for the future, like dreaming with God. Like, prayer is one of the things that makes me really happy as a person. Having a healthy lifestyle. I think a lot of times there are things about the way that we go about life that we don't fully recognize affects our level of happiness. What is that? Like neurochemistry. Like, this might be a thing to talk about with your doctor, but exercising regularly, getting a good amount of sleep, eating certain foods. There's a lot of things that can affect our happiness, like on a chemical, hormonal level. So I think it's important to be aware of those, maybe do some research on that. Practicing gratitude is a thing that I'm sure comes up frequently, just because it gives you a chance to reflect on the things that you have instead of focusing on the things that you lack. And that kind of promotes like positive thinking. Even being grateful for your spouse, even noticing the things that you like about your spouse. Those are forms of gratitude, forms of positive thinking. Prioritizing your self-care, like understanding when your battery is draining. I remember there was maybe like a year or so. This was probably when I was working. I think I was working full-time and going to school full-time. My thing was always like taking super long baths with like candles and bath bombs and snacks and stuff. That was like a really big like self-care thing that kept me going, because I can't tell you the amount of times that people always looked at me and were like, how the heck are you doing everything that you're doing? And I had little tiny routines like that, like just taking a really long bath, going for a walk, having a spa day, hanging out with friends. Those are all really big things. Let's see. One other thing I wanted to say. Oh yeah, just along that thought of like hanging around people. It is really important to be around positive, supportive, healthy people. A lot of times being in relationships that are strenuous and aggravating, that especially if it's like frequent and common and daily and predictable, that can decrease your sense of happiness. So taking inventory of that is beneficial. Another thing I would say is to develop like healthy coping mechanisms. Like I kind of mentioned, addressing smaller problems in life, like getting like finances in order, having a budgeting plan, a spending plan, a saving plan, making sure that you are relieving your stress in a healthy way is important. And sometimes if you don't know, like I'm sure that there are some people who are like, man, I'm not happy, but I don't know why I'm not happy. And I'm doing things that used to make me happy, but they're not making me happy anymore. And I don't really know what's up. I don't know what the problem is. If you're in that specific case, then my feedback is always going to be to like get help, like get therapy, get counseling to figure out like the root of the issue, to figure out where the struggle is happening, where the negative feelings are coming from. If there's something, that's maybe hiding, like if there's like an underlying issue somewhere. Sometimes therapists and third parties and mentors and counselors, like they can help us to see things we didn't see before. Okay, moving on to the next tip, which this is a thought I feel like people have kind of frequently. Any sort of thought that makes you think that the grass is greener on the other side needs to be dismissed officially. Marriage is hard, but divorce is hard too. And there's a lot about both that are not easy, but I feel like marriage is the thing that is the most valuable and the most rare and the most precious, and to me it's worth fighting for. So if you think that getting out of marriage is going to solve your problems, or if you think that getting into marriage with another person is going to solve your problems, I can pretty much guarantee you it's just going to give you new ones, different ones, a different variation of problems, maybe even more painful problems. I think it's a lie and it's an illusion to think that the grass is greener on the other side. Another tip that I have, which this one kind of came up in a conversation that I was having, and I was kind of astounded. Like, I feel like sometimes I don't realize the extent of my Christian worldview until I'm talking to people. But I could have never imagined doing any part of marriage without Jesus, without Jesus's help. Like, I really probably should have put this as like the first point or like the very last point to like hit this home. But I think we need Jesus to do marriage well, and to do marriage to like the best extent that it could possibly be done. We need Jesus. So my recommendation is to make sure you're doing it with him. Don't do it without him. I feel like, which this has kind of been like an internal prayer of mine for a bit, but when I don't have anybody, I go to Jesus. And sometimes even when I do have people, I go to Jesus because he's the most perfect person. He is the most perfect person for me. He understands me. He gets me. He knows me. He knows my flaws. He knows my mistakes. And he still loves me more than anybody else in my life. The love that people have for me that I know of, all their love could be combined, and it wouldn't even compare to the love of Jesus. And I think as individuals, we need him beyond comprehension. But to love another person to the degree that you should love a spouse in marriage, I think that requires Jesus. We need his help in seeing the other person the way that Jesus sees them. We need his help in healing. We need his help in communicating and dealing with people. We need his help in forgiving. There's so many aspects of marriage that require Jesus's help and intervention. So choosing to let him into that covenant relationship is probably the best thing that you could do. And I guarantee, like, regardless of any outcome, do it all with Jesus. My next tip is to practice your communication. I feel like communication is a thing that comes up often with relationships. And just along that line, I'll share these things. Communicating doesn't have to be an exhausting experience. It doesn't mean that you're always arguing or always debating. It doesn't mean that you don't have time to do other enjoyable things that don't require talking. It's not about talking more. It's about talking better. It's not about quantity. It's about quality. It's not about what you say. It's about how you say it. And I'll say more often than not, people opt for silence, especially when they're dealing with problems. And silence isn't a solution. And especially if you happen to be listening to this and you're in a talking stage or a dating relationship, I'd say the less you are able to communicate your thoughts and your feelings in a healthy and productive way, and the less understanding you have for the other person trying to do that, the less ready you are for a relationship. If you don't know how to talk, in my opinion, you don't know how to love. That's just me. It's a very controversial idea. But if you're married, I'd say this is one of the most important things you can focus on. It's one of the most important things you could probably see somebody about. And I think often people opt for silence because they're not aware of themselves. They don't know, they genuinely don't know what they feel. They are genuinely unaware of their thought life. They don't know what they think. And because they're unaware of themselves, they have nothing to express. So with communication, like, there's a lot of internal work that happens before you actually go about expressing your emotions and your thoughts. So I really feel like it's more of a discipline than people realize. And so if you're struggling to communicate in a certain level of depth, I guess my recommendation as like a first step is to practice being aware of how you feel and using feeling words. So if you were to like check in yourself daily, for example, and you ask yourself the question, how do I feel? Instead of saying, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm okay, saying words like, I am feeling content, I'm feeling calm, I'm feeling fulfilled, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling excited, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling numb. You know, for example, if you're like, I don't feel anything, like whatever, blah, like I feel numb. And then you could go deeper. What's making me feel this way? When I think about this feeling, what is the main event that is triggering this feeling that I'm having? How can I improve this feeling? You know, so that's how you practice being aware of your feelings. If you're trying to practice being aware of your thoughts, a big thing I would say is to practice journaling. And, you know, some people find that having journal prompts, like questions, kind of gets them, gives them some inspiration for writing. But it could be as simple as like journaling your day. Today I did this. This event happened at work. It made me feel like this. I had this thought. I prayed today, from this hour to this hour. I talked to God about this. I had this conflict with a colleague or an acquaintance, and it didn't go so well. This happened, then this happened. And I realized that, I was feeling like this and I got triggered by that. Like, it kind of, if you write it all out, it can help you realize what you're thinking and how you're thinking and your thought patterns and stuff like that. Another thing that I would recommend, switching on to the next point, is to also be conscious and intentional about improving your conflict resolution style. So just a handful of tips for that is to practice like active listening, giving your full attention, showing the other person that you're engaged, like with eye contact, with nodding. A big thing, this is actually something I recommended to my sister, like especially when we're dealing with conflicts that are really complex, is like reflecting and clarifying on what the other person is saying to make sure that we understand them correctly. Using, the information that the other person is giving you to inform your decision, asking questions, especially when you don't understand, being clear and concise when it comes to conflict resolution. So thinking about like what you want to say in a way that's understandable and simple and straightforward. And when it comes to like conflicts, making sure that you're addressing one problem at a time, staying on topic, separating like facts from opinions. I know a lot of times like problems or arguments seem to escalate because we start bringing up old problems before we finish solving this new problem. And it's very easy to get lost in that kind of pattern. I'd say it's really important to be mindful of like your body language. Making sure that the other person feels safe and reassured when they're having a difficult conversation with you is something that's really important. It's something that women, and especially empaths, like they can be very sensitive to nonverbal cues. So, and this is something I have to be careful with too, as like someone who's from up north, but when you're angry, watching your face and watching your tone and watching what you say, all of those are invaluable skills. Emotional intelligence is a skill I'm going to have to hit on a lot with this, because if you're able to recognize your own emotions and other people's emotions, like that helps you respond appropriately, productively, empathetically. And if you're aware of that more often than not, you're able to manage your emotions. Like you'll know how to stay calm, composed. If you're in a heated discussion, you can manage to still acknowledge and validate like another person's feelings. Like that goes a long way. It builds a lot of trust. All of these things can be used to come up with a solution to the problem. All of these skills can be used to help inform like your next steps when you're trying to solve a problem in your relationship. I think another really beautiful thing that I've heard people say before is to provide and ask for feedback, like constructive feedback from your spouse. Listening to feedback without becoming defensive and seeing it as like a chance to grow and improve. Maybe like checking in regularly and offering suggestions in a humble way, like with a really good delivery. Communication and conflict resolution, like both of those things, they require practice. And it could be really different for every like dynamic of a relationship. Like everyone has a different person to learn. Everyone has a different skill to improve. This next one is common, or how do I say it? Not common, but I feel like I see it come up a lot. It's important to be open-minded, and it's important to be willing to compromise. Like, compromise is like the key word for marriage, I think. People think and feel differently than you. And the more rigid and unbending you are, the more problems you're going to have. You're not always right. You don't know it all. And if your relationships are like quote unquote proof that you do know it all or you are always right, then you need to get out more. Because being an expert in one thing doesn't make you an expert in all things. And I think you need to be willing to listen and hear people out. Another tip that I have for like things to do when you don't want to be married anymore is to know your triggers. Like, the second a discussion becomes emotionally charged because of any sort of like previous trauma, you need to take a second to pause and collect yourself and communicate calmly about it. And I'd even say, like, to safeguard yourself and the other person, take a moment to create a safe and appropriate boundary around how to talk through it productively. And I could give, let's see, like some lifestyle examples of this. Let's say you're talking to your spouse and you say, the way that you responded when I expressed this concern, it made me feel like you were invalidating me when you dismissed it as like an issue, like a valid issue. And your response made me feel more anxious and more guarded. And in the future, I just need to know that you care about the things that I care about, simply because I care about it. And if you can't do that, then I can't speak openly with you. That could be a way of like communicating through those boundaries. Another example, let's see, I could give like a practical, relatable one for me. It would be like, okay, I went through a really tough divorce. It was traumatic for me in a lot of ways. What you're saying at this point is reminding me of that, and it is making me feel like I'm no longer safe or secure in this relationship moving forward. And because I'm afraid that you're going to leave, or I'm, struggling with this feeling of rejection or abandonment, I need you to affirm that I'm safe or that I'm okay. Or I need you to not say this or not say that. So, like in an example where someone would be like, let's say an argument comes up. I'm married. I went through a previous divorce, and they're like, the argument's heated. They're like, I want to leave. I want a divorce. I don't want to do this anymore. But it turns out that was just a thing that they were saying and not actually a thing that they meant. A boundary for me specifically, and in general, I don't endorse like saying that anyway, but that would be a way of communicating something like that. If you were, let's see, I'm trying to think of like traumatic examples, where, you're triggered and you have to communicate something. That's like the point of this. Let's say you were in some kind of an abusive relationship, or some kind of situation happened where, you were abused in some way. And let's say that this abuse that happened makes you more vigilant or paranoid or anxious regarding like physical boundaries for yourself and your kids. So when you're communicating with your spouse, you could say something like, this stuff happened. I need you to approach me in this space in a certain way. Or, a different way of being would be like, hey, when you shout, it reminds me of this situation, and it shuts me down. Like, it makes me disassociate. So we have to keep a level tone or I'm going to like check out of this conversation. And it's not like all of these things are situations where it's not necessarily a conscious choice, the way that you react. You've been triggered by some type of traumatic event. What you're doing is you're communicating so that the other person knows how to reach you and make you feel safe and secure when you're navigating the problem. That's like the point of all these examples I was trying to give. In general, it's always good to look for common ground, have the same goal, work to find solutions that work for both of you, and basically like agree, plan, and follow through with it. I wanted to say something else, but I think I forgot. Oh, yeah, because I feel like there was this quote that was like, when we're having a conflict, we're attacking the problem together. We're not attacking each other. Like something similar, something along those lines. I kind of like that. So all those like bits and pieces were kind of geared toward communication and conflict resolution. In case you weren't in case you weren't able to piece all those together. I have like, let's see, 5 more tips here. One is to rebuild your connection. Connection can be rebuilt. Trust can be rebuilt. Love can be rebuilt. And there are little things that you can do to be successful with that. You can have more quality time. You can take part in activities where you guys have like a shared interest. You can make time to just enjoy each other. I really like the idea of like trying to outdo your spouse in love, like having a very servant-oriented mindset. I feel like that's really beautiful when it comes to the context of marriage. As a wife or as a husband, always making a commitment to change, always putting in a consistent effort, even if it's not 100%, always giving something, always giving what you have. Making the choice to forgive well, to not hold on to bitterness, to preserve the quality of your heart. That's a really big thing. When you are envisioning the future, when you're planning for the future, when you're considering the future, understanding that you're responsible for creating the life that you want to live ultimately. And I guess my last and final point, it's kind of like a full circle thing because I feel like I mentioned this in the beginning. Everyone, and I mean everyone, has a breaking point. Everyone has a limit. So don't take your partner for granted. Don't take their strength for granted. Don't take their stability for granted. Don't take their acts of service for granted. And don't test them. Don't antagonize them. Don't threaten them. Treasure them, value them, affirm them. Before I end this one, I don't feel like I can end it without sharing a prayer for you guys. And this isn't necessarily like something I'm praying over you. I'm saying like this is like a prayer where if you find yourself in a space where you don't want to be married anymore and you're stuck in the denial stage where you're having ruminating thoughts and all this stuff, you're not happy, you don't like your spouse, you don't love your spouse, you don't want to do this, I wanted to share an outline that you guys could pray. And I'm hoping that this could kind of be a foundation moving forward. And then I'm going to share a resource that I recommend. It kind of helps follow through with like the practical steps and stuff. And it's biblically based also, which is really cool. So the prayer that I recommend starting out with is, God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be married. I don't have motivation for all the work that it's going to take. I don't love this person. I'm not even sure that I like this person. And so I'm coming to you with the little bits and pieces and scraps of what I have left. And I'm believing that you're able to step in and you're able to fix it, and that you're able to fix me. I believe you can fix my marriage because I believe that you can fix me. I'm giving you permission to start with me. Show me the thoughts that need to be corrected. Show me the parts of my heart that need to heal. Help me to see my spouse the way that you see them. Help me to understand them the way that you understand them. Help me to see through to the root of the issues that we have. I invite you to deal with me. I invite you to deal with my hard-heartedness. I invite you to deal with my apathy, with my numbness, with my complacency. Give me an accurate vision here of what is at stake if I don't depend on you to do this. When I argue with my spouse, urge me to come to you. When I feel alone and unloved or neglected or abandoned, remind me to come to you when I don't know what to do, when I don't know how to solve the problem. Give me divine, creative, unique solutions for me and my house. You love my spouse and you love me, and your intention for marriage was to be a demonstration of you and your love for the church. So give us a selfless and steadfast love, and give me the boldness to even ask you to make this process fun. Holy Spirit, I'm asking you to make this process fun. Make it refreshing. Make it refreshing to my mind, to my heart, to my soul. And help us to get through this like every step of the way. That's the kind of prayer I would pray. I'd pray it even if I don't mean it 100%. I'd pray it even if I don't feel it. And if I don't even have words, I'm just going to say, like, God, like, I need your help. Like, I can't do this. I can't see. I literally have no vision for this. And I feel like in realizing how helpless I am, how helpless I feel, how helpless it seems, I feel like there's something about that could wake us up to how much we need God, even for something that could seem so simple. Like, I promise you, God really cares. God cares about you, and he cares about your spouse, and he cares about your marriage. He cares about your kids. He cares about your inheritance, and it matters. The resource that I wanted to share with you guys is called The Love Dare. I'm going to see if I can find it on Amazon really quick. And I'm okay if you guys hear me type this because I'm kind of exhausted. Let's see. I'm also going to attach it in the description here. But, okay, so it's a book called The Love Dare. It's like a 40-day challenge, if I'm not mistaken. And it's written by Alex Kendrick and Stephen Kendrick. This seems correct. And I love it because it's like a daily devotion, and it gives you challenges for every day, but there's also a biblical reference, a biblical like message to it, which I really like. This was one of the books that I got when I felt like I needed it in my marriage, and I really feel like it could be a help to you as well. It kind of gives you like, it kind of removes the mental obstacles we can kind of create of not knowing what to do or how to do it. I feel like it's just like a really cool practical tool. So I hope you guys liked this episode. I hope it helped. This is probably the longest episode I've ever done, and I hope it helps somebody. I really do. This is like one of the things I care about the most, obviously, with my whole Heaven at Home brand. Anyway, I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you guys so much for listening. Feel free to DM me to send me your feedback. Check out the description below to follow me on social media. This podcast is listener supported. Don't forget to subscribe. Remember, you are fully known and deeply loved. I'll see you in the next one.